Hello, I am Tristan, and welcome to DePIN Unplugged episode 5. And I'm joined here today with Nick Carpintino from Blockworks Research. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. And I also want to say before we get started, thank you, Super Team Germany, for hosting this podcast. So, Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background, and what's your favorite part of blockchain?
Yeah, glad to be here. So I have spent probably the better part of the past 6 years researching the DePIN industry. Specifically, I would say DePIN is probably the piece of blockchain that's most close to home for me, and I think there's still a lot to be figured out, but it's probably the place within blockchain and crypto that's going to see the largest scale adoption in like the medium to long term. So currently researching DePIN at Blockworks Research among a few other topics, and am super jazzed about the direction that the industry is headed in today.
Amazing. So let's just kick right off the bat. I would love to hear your definition of what is DePIN and why do people say it's dead, and why isn't it dead?
Okay, yeah, I'll keep it simple for you. So DePIN, decentralized physical infrastructure networks. Side note, definitely needs a better name. It's something that people have been talking about for a long time. We need a better name for this subsector of crypto. But DePIN is basically the side of crypto where you can use crypto economic incentives to build real world infrastructure. And that can range from a variety of industries, but I think probably the most core components and the ones that are most popular today would be telecom, storage, energy, compute, and communications infrastructure. So think your AT&Ts of the world, your PMGs and ERCOTs of the world, and your AWSs slash any cloud that you're seeing out there today theoretically can be replicated on blockchain rails to offer a superior product.
And I think it's
And
really interesting too. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I think that's like a really interesting area, because it seems to me that a lot of even like some of these bigger telecom players now are getting into Web3, or they have people who are focused on Web3. Like I feel like I've met people from many major telecom players who have like a Web3 team.
yeah, I think you're starting to see institutions and corporates across the board begin investigating crypto, building out teams to investigate, but I think the execution, as expected, has lagged behind what could have happened. You're definitely seeing teams that are interacting with crypto, and you're definitely seeing teams that are interacting with crypto and may not even know that they're interacting with crypto, which is one of like the
Mhm.
bullish signals that you would look for in a DePIN project, is that a large competitor can utilize the product or supply being generated by a DePIN
Mhm.
and leverage that in a composable way without ever having to touch a token.
Yeah, I think that's like a really huge one. So why do people say DePIN is dead? What's going on with this?
I think I disagree with the point that DePIN is dead. I think we're sort of between waves and seeing a second wave of maturation. I think there was an initial wave of DePINs that came out. There were some gems in there that survived, but for the most part, there was too much hype and token designs were extremely nascent. Um, while tokens are down, we're seeing revenues are up, and most networks are actually constrained on supply today, not demand. So we've pretty much inverted the problem, but still a problem to address nonetheless. Networks like Helium have nationwide mobile hotspot networks and are expanding to Brazil and Mexico. GeoNet, I think, is a prime example here in that they've built the largest RTK provider network in the world, offering a better service because they built their network as a DePIN. And you're seeing real innovation happening in some of the more experimental sides of the industry with things like BitTensor for training, inference, and supplementary services to build sort of a decentralized AI lab of sorts. But I guess to summarize, I think the dead narrative comes primarily from some bear market cleanup. Weak projects died, strong ones kept building, and the market is not aligned with this narrative and has continually valued the entire sector as dead infrastructure. But I think we're sort of at a bottom here, and I think that we're in a good spot to have projects, new and existing projects, emerge out of sort of the depths here and start building some real utilities.
Yeah, I'm obviously very bullish on this, especially, I mean, given the podcast is named DePIN Unplugged, I'm kind of biased towards the DePIN side. So I think like one of the questions here is, I mean, you spend your time studying this and understanding these problems and understanding how these companies work. And especially with this, I mean, like this interesting inversion problem that you brought up, I think I'd be really curious to maybe touch on both sides of this, but maybe starting with the tokenomics models. What do you think that we've learned from the past successes, past failures, and what is going to be emerging when we start thinking about successful or viable functioning tokenomic models that are going to complement a revenue generating successful company that's at this interface of like Web 2, Web 3? How do we design tokenomics so that it works really well with these companies?
I'll preface by saying I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows, right? I don't think anyone
Mhm.
agrees that DePIN token design today is perfect or that any one network has figured this out. Some models seem to work better than others. I think that's well known, but the core problem today boils down to the fact that inflation must be lower than value creation, or the network will enter a death spiral. Right? Like there's really
Mhm.
no other issue with tokenomics other than balancing inflation with value creation today. In networks where you have proprietary hardware, we're seeing lots of revenue sharing and buyback and burn mechanisms as sort of the meta. It's TBD on if these are the end state or if these are, a valuable value accretive mechanism. But that said, it's interesting that it's become the meta and that we're seeing some projects move towards it while others that have been doing it for a long time are moving away from it due to a lack of value creation. And
Mhm.
then in networks where you have homogeneous hardware, you can add layers of either staking or software licenses to represent skin in the game. I think that's been valuable and that's been something that has done well over the years. But that's not an end all be all solution to the inflation problem. And then I think today the new model that we're seeing is KPI based emissions, both in DeFi and in DePIN. We haven't seen any of these networks hit their KPIs yet, and so thus we haven't quite seen what the end state looks like for that. And so I'm still TBD on how that's going to play out, but that's sort of the latest evolution that we're seeing, other than a couple bespoke examples.
And I mean, the KPI driven emissions, it's logical, but I think it's really there's a few areas where I see this being super challenging. One, as you get started, you're not like an established network. There's still like maybe you have some industry knowledge on what the proper KPIs should be and an understanding of what they should be from like a node perspective. But I feel like this could be a pretty big challenge to solve in how do you ensure that nobody is gaming the system and like getting like some type of extremely high emission of tokens when they actually aren't deserving those tokens in the first place. And then I think the other thing that would be interesting, an interesting area to address, is too little token emissions, where people are looking like they're not producing enough for the network, and then you don't have enough supply being generated. I imagine those are probably the two main issues, or are there other issues?
I think I'll throw a third one into the mix here. If I'm a founder of an early stage project and
Mm-hmm.
my emissions to the foundation entity or to some sort of merged labs foundation entity are governed by KPIs, I can't control the weather, so to speak, right? Like I don't know what's
Mm-hmm.
going to happen. I can't control markets, and at a certain point, I'm going to need some tokens in order to cover my operating expenses and fund growth. And so I think like
Mm-hmm.
what that boils down to is that you can't miss a KPI. If you build that model, you either need to adjust KPIs via governance parameters, which really negates the process in the first place, or you're going to need to essentially, like forego whatever growth or opportunity that you have in front of you in order to continue building towards your original vision.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, and it's also really interesting because it kind of seems to mirror, I think, some real world dynamics you have in businesses that are like, there's a lot of business, especially in finance, there's a lot of businesses that are very KPI driven or bottom line driven. So it's interesting because it gives you a different, I would say, like incentive model for the people who are participants of the network. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I understand employee level KPIs, but I don't understand network level KPIs, right? Or maybe KPI based
Yeah.
emissions, not KPIs in that case. But like, it's great to incentivize the people in publicly traded companies. It's very common to incentivize the people that are driving growth with some sort of KPI. But at the same time, there's like a weird balance that you have to find, and I don't think we're anywhere close to that today.
No, I mean, like, do you see this maybe becoming like an evolution kind of piece then, where they maybe start off with that as the end goal of we have some type of KPI based emission at a certain percentage of tokens already admitted, where you operate on one model, say for the first, or like maybe you even have like 2 or 3 models that you stage through, depending on how you want to or how you strategize growing the network.
Yeah, I mean, any model is going to have an evolution. A lot of people look at changes to emissions models over time as a negative. I think it's something that should certainly be monitored, but at the same time, it's something
Mm-hmm.
that I at least believe is pretty interesting, and it's something that we are probably going to need to iterate over time on. So yeah, I mean, like, I think these KPI based emissions are promising if it makes sense for your project.
Yeah.
They're probably going to evolve over time like any emission structure does. And it's likely that founders will pivot away from it, just like they've pivoted away from every previous model that
Mm-hmm.
we've seen in the industry.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think on the other side of this, how does this get into deployers who want to participate in the network, and what their overall incentive strategy is, and their, I guess, willingness to participate in one network and support one network to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of two classes of deployers within DePIN today, maybe
Yeah.
three. I'll throw out the two simple ones and then throw another one on top. But you've got your enthusiasts, people who are looking to make money but are not having to cover costs. I buy a helium hotspot, I put it in my own house. I don't have to pay rent for it. I'm already paying for the internet, the power. Like, it's once I've deployed my capital into purchasing the unit up front, there are no ongoing costs and everything that I earn is pure profit. And I would say that's probably 30-ish% of the industry today. The other 70% is going to be your institutional operators, so people that are building businesses around deploying DePIN hardware. And I think that, I guess, to take a step back, that in any network's evolution, the early deployers are always going to be motivated by ROI calculations, ideological alignment, and speculation. And I think in the retail side of things, and maybe even on the institutional side of things, your sunk cost fallacy is going to keep people operating at a loss longer than they would traditionally do so. But I think there's been sort of a transition from like institutional deployers going from like, I'm a deployer who is a speculator, to I'm a deployer who is an operator, right? And there's a sort of a critical inflection point that we've met for network maturity as a result. And then a stat that I'll throw at you here: the deployers who continue to hold conviction in some of the larger, more mature DePINs today typically have operating costs, whether that be a fixed rent or a revenue share or something like that. And obviously are paying for internet and electricity as well. And so as a result, the majority of those deployers, and like on average over 100% of token emissions that are emitted month over month for the last 8 months or so, have been sold on the open market, right? So like, The simple gist of what that means is that deployers aren't able to cover their operating costs due to the current inflation and the current tokenomic
Mhm.
structures that DePINs are employing today.
Hmm. So what can be done to change that? What can be done to?
I mean, you need to find a strict balance, right? That
Hmm.
can be variable, but if you're a DePIN network today, you either have low emissions and are slowly building towards an inflection point. A lot of people call that like
Hmm.
a break even or a break even equilibrium or whatever. Um, but generally, like you either are in the early stages, you're emitting a ton of tokens and you have a lot of sell pressure on your token, or you're not emitting very many tokens and you have seasoned institutional operators who are maybe able to cover their operating costs, maybe or not. So, I mean, you have to find a balance between like high and low emissions and then strike that balance where it makes the most sense for your operators. Because what you don't want is a bunch of people to purchase your hardware, make, $10,000 in a month and then unplug it and never use it again.
Yeah, exactly. And so to that point, are these institutional players then a threat to successful networks potentially?
No, I don't think so. I think they're really like the core base of customers that these networks should be targeting. I mean, it
Hmm.
depends on your use
But
case, right? Does it
yeah,
cost me $10 to spin up your hardware, or does it cost me $10,000 to spin up your hardware? Those are like a very different customer profile. An enthusiast is not going to spend $10,000 to put a device on the top of the tallest building in the city.
right.
Um, but yeah, so to summarize, I think like your deployers are your base, right? Like they're key to
Yeah.
your network success as much as anything else that you're doing. And I think that networks just need to find a balance there, right? Like you need sustainable emissions to a point where people can build businesses around
Yeah.
your network while simultaneously not having to speculate on forward cash flows in their individual business.
Absolutely. And to what extent do we need to worry about decentralization here too? Like with who owns and operates these and control or has a say or a stake in the network? Maybe this gets a little bit more into the governance side of things. And I think as far as like even the distribution side of things goes, like it really depends on the network. But I would say like some of these, I would say especially in like telecom related use cases or communications related use cases, like having really well spaced geographical nodes is super valuable. Uh,
I mean, in a lot of cases, your decentralized network is really more of a distributed network with a centralized backbone, right? If
yeah.
you're not running your own validators, there's really no risk, but you're also not benefiting from the sovereignty that decentralization
Hmm.
grants you. Um, to that point, I think geographic arbitrage plays kind of a large role here, where like most networks are not concentrated in one region and thus like can't be
Hmm.
controlled or orchestrated, I guess maybe is a better word,
Hmm.
by a single server or like a single endpoint, right? So in on the governance side of things, there's like a different story to be told, but in terms of actual decentralization, I think very few DePINs today are at a point where you could say the network is end-to-end decentralized.
Hmm. I mean, to what degree would it be important or more or less important?
I think that depends on the use case as well. I mean,
Mm.
you look at a telecom like a 5G network building in DePIN, they are governed by a set of rules within the country that they're operating in. They're also governed
Mhm.
by SLAs and contracts with their customers. And so, in a way, like you need to trust that team's execution. And as a result, like if they're going to be able to scale faster and build a better product by having a centralized backbone, I think that's fine. if you're building something that's more of a privacy preserving DePIN, right? Like a network of nodes
Yeah.
building like a sovereign communication network, maximum decentralization is the only option. And I
Yeah.
think there are varying degrees of that today, but it's definitely not a standard within the industry.
Well, I think some of it matters is like what is a lot of it is what is the intention of this network, like, and especially talking about things like data sovereignty and privacy, like this becomes a really big issue. And I mean, maybe it's not on the forefront of everybody's mind, but it's on the it is, I would say, something that is of a big concern now. As I mean, privacy becomes less and less existent with the development of technology, and then data sovereignty becomes more and more important as people are really worried about their access to data and really connectivity in general. I mean, especially like since we're seeing kind of a rise in censorship globally.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a privacy paradox, right? Like you have
Yeah.
public blockchains versus private data, and marrying those two requires either very sophisticated encryption, zero knowledge proofs, or some sort of access-based system with a
Mhm.
centralized backend, right? I don't think anyone has solved this. It's something that I think goes through iterations over the years. Like
Yeah.
decentralized private data is getting better and better, but nobody's figured out how to make that permissionless without sort of a single orchestrator in the middle. Um, Nobody talks about it anymore, but decentralized identity was like a pretty
Yeah.
awesome piece of this, um, where users could own their own data and sort of port between
Mhm.
services. It's fallen out of fashion in recent years, but in a way is still used on a sort of a siloed basis within certain protocols.
But it makes a lot of sense to do stuff like that. I mean, like when the idea is how do you best safeguard your digital identity? I mean, things like this make a lot of sense. But I would say probably wide scale adoption is going to be the biggest challenge with something like that.
Yeah, and I think from like a regulatory lens, like we're not there yet either. You
Mhm.
you're not in a spot where you can have everything be fully encrypted and not have a backdoor and reach a sufficient scale without some sort of government telling you that they need access to the data, right? There are laws being built out around
Mhm.
this, but it's not something that I'm a firm believer in today. Right, like I'm a firm believer in
Mhm.
data sovereignty, but in general, I don't believe the governments are going to adopt this anytime soon. So as a result, like you need to have at least centralized visibility for certain parties into the data that you're propagating, or you risk regulatory
Mhm.
capture.
Yeah, that's super true. And yeah, it's really interesting, I think, too, because it also gets into this question of like where is the place of government in all this? And like I would say like public governance and blockchain infrastructure. Because yeah, I mean, of course the government wants to know if something is occurring that's directly relevant to national interests, like they want to be able to have a purview or insight into what that is or what's going on. And so, does a blockchain support mechanisms that allow both transparency in terms of what you want a decentralized network, privacy in terms of what people can keep private to themselves without sharing with the rest of the world, but then also enough to be like, okay, well, the government wants to know this, so this is how they can get access to it. But I mean, there's a lot of I think moral or ethical conflicts with this. So it's like it gets into like where do we draw the line?
Yeah, the government piece is funny, right? Because they
Yeah.
want access, they want visibility, and they
Mhm.
want to be able to control what's happening at least within their country, but usually
Yep.
globally. While at the same
Mhm.
time, governments are starting to see sort of the other side of DePIN, where
Mhm.
there are other pieces that I think are valuable to governments, right? Like having a decentralized backbone for your
Mhm.
telecom systems,
Yeah.
having distributed energy resources spread out so that you can tap
Yeah.
into those. And like I think especially within energy and telecom, we're going to see government adoption in the short term for
Mhm.
networks that are compliant with the government's meta at a given point in time. right? So if that means
Yeah.
sacrificing some data sovereignty in order to partner with slash become enshrined within government policy, I think that's a worthy trade-off.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting because it also gets into like how do the blockchain companies or the DePIN companies of the future, how do they interact with the government? Does everybody have a lobbyist on the payroll who's in Washington D.C. in the U.S. or in Brussels in Europe who is lobbying on their behalf for policy in place?
I think this is something that's been tested. I think it's generally been successful,
Hmm.
but we have to go beyond lobbying efforts, right? Like
Hmm.
you need to be convincing people that have the government's ear that this is the future. They
Hmm.
I think what people fail to realize is that, I mean, there's lobbying for every industry in the world, and those lobbyists are,
Yeah.
they're bothering politicians all day. And so, like, yes, step one is getting in the room with them, being able to tell them what you're thinking and what you're building, but you have to go beyond that. And I
Oh,
think proving value is the way to do that.
when you say proving value, do you mean like, I mean, let's use the case of like these decentralized energy grids, because I think this is a good example. So like there is obviously an interest to have an efficiently functioning energy grid for, I mean, honestly, for national security and also just general prosperity of the people in the country. So you have like a decentralized energy grid. How can some of these companies like play into demonstrating that they're actually a net value for the countries that they're operating in?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to depend on your country. In the US, it's
Hmm.
a different beast because the main constraint to energy today is AI development. AI data
Big
center
time.
interconnects
Big
are
time.
backlogged 3 to 5 years, and grid participation economics are compelling, but like the systems aren't built to connect all these disparate parties, right?
Right.
So in the US, I think this is probably the piece that I was talking about when I was talking about the government seeing value in deep networks in general, but specifically decentralized energy grids. Is like
Mhm.
at a certain point, we're not going to be able to scale power capacity to the point that we need to. We're pretty much already there. The government's going to lag that by a few years. But if a distributed energy network can produce a solid amount of electricity, right? Like it comparable to
Mhm.
like a small power
Yeah.
plant in a given region, and then sell that back to the grid, that's going to unlock huge incremental capacity. And so
Yeah.
as a result, like if governments are constrained, if there's no way that we can build more cell phone towers, there's no way that we can build more power plants right
Mhm.
now, but there's a distributed network that we can tap into for excess capacity, even just as a short-term scaling mechanism,
Mhm.
that's going to be valuable, and it's going to be something that is closer to home, I think, for a lot of the regulators out there today. And so the basic gist is that if you're able to provide value in the short term and reach whatever the minimum viable scale that you need to reach is, you shouldn't have any problem once
Mhm.
governments come around to the idea of distributed resources.
Yeah. I guess like do people, I mean, and the companies that you're like looking at today who are working on solving these problems, do you see them working more on, say, a state level right now, or are they looking at the national level?
I would say it's a regional problem, right? In some
Mhm.
countries, it's a national level problem
Mhm.
because the energy grid is nationalized.
Mhm.
In the markets that I think most DePIN projects are operating in the energy side of things today,
Mhm.
you're either semi-nationalized or not nationalized. And so as a result,
Mhm.
you have deregulated markets with competitors, and you're trying
Mhm.
to not necessarily compete, but become composable with as many of those competitors in a given region. In
Yeah.
the US, it's not quite at the state level, but it's more sort of regional, like northeast, southeast sort of stuff, like divided into quadrants, I would guess you could say.
Yeah.
And then you've got specific outliers like California and Texas. but I think the competition is like almost not there. All of these companies are doing whatever they can to get more access to capacity. And so if if the DePIN in Texas has a viable scale that they can offload to the local grid, that's like one of the key drivers there, right? And I think that's also how you capture attention from regulators, right?
Mm-hmm. But in the case of Texas, they would just be working with Texas because I mean their grid is literally isolated, as far as I know, from the rest of
Yeah, yeah.
the United States.
Extremely deregulated. So you've got hundreds of
Yeah,
competing energy companies in
that
Texas. And yeah, it's completely isolated, right?
which you don't see in many other states. It's not as competitive.
And so as a result, right, like much of the AI data centers were being built in Texas. Some of them got built, some of them
Interesting.
have been abandoned, some of them aren't powered up yet, I guess you could say. And regulators are moving to larger regions, or
Mm-hmm.
I guess like regions that comprise multiple states. And so like the meta right now is Oklahoma, cheap land,
Yeah,
cheap energy, and excess capacity. But that's only going to be the reality for so long.
yeah. I mean Oklahoma. I guess they have oil, but like where and natural gas. But is most of the electricity in Oklahoma probably just natural gas? I would imagine. I don't know
Yeah,
if you
for the
know.
most part, it's going to be natural gas. I don't think they invest very much in renewables.
I mean, maybe they could do solar. They could
Yeah,
find
actually,
some wind for that.
Glow, which is
And
one of
wind.
the decentralized energy projects today, actually just they've sort of moved to this model where they introduce new regions, and so they've got Missouri, they've got
Uh,
Utah, they've
neat.
got Colorado, and so they actually just added Oklahoma this week.
Oh, cool. Do they have a nice visualization? What's the name of this stipend again?
Glow, I think it's
Glow. Ah, I've heard of
glow.org.
it. Yeah, I'm gonna check real quick. I don't know if I can pull it off, but I mean, they have a super nice website, so it's worth checking out. But it'd be cool if they had like some type of map for this. That might be kind of interesting. They have an audits map. I see. Very interesting. So so they do this regionally, which I mean I think that makes a lot of sense with energy based on our whole discussion here of how how you manage. And I think that what's really interesting then specifically with this glow case is how they scale. So it sounds like they are focusing on one region and then they continue to scale to other regions as they I imagine are growing their network.
Sort of. They operate on a slightly different model there. I would say most
Mhm.
DePIN energy projects are going to be operating on the model that you just described. In Glow's
Mhm.
case, people who are involved in the protocol can accrue a governance token and then stake that governance token to a
Oh,
region, or create a new region and then stake the governance token to
oh,
that, right?
super
So
interesting.
I could create Texas, right? Like they don't have a presence in Texas. I could create a Texas region and then they would begin scaling in that region. Um,
Could you do like sub-regions? So it's like, I mean, South Texas, let's say. Or like let's say you want to build it on Starbase, Texas.
yeah, I mean, I think you could define whatever region you want it to be. They're definitely not
Interesting.
states, and it seems like they're at the state level, like a lot of them are states, but they're deployed in specific regions of the state. I think wherever the energy that you're going to get from solar panels is like
Mm-hmm.
most viable, or where you're getting the best direct sunlight on a given day,
Mm-hmm.
is where they end up deploying. But there's it's an underserved market for sure, solar in general. And for a state like Texas, like I'm pretty sure you could cover like 2% of the state in solar panels and produce enough electricity for the entire state on an ongoing basis.
That would make sense. I mean, I haven't done the math, but that would check out in my brain math.
Yeah, I did the math for Boston recently just because I was
And
curious, and came out with like 4 to 5%. But then you hit headaches that I think you wouldn't hit in Texas, where like from a regulatory angle, you can't put almost all the buildings in Boston are considered historic buildings. I would say like 40 to
Yeah.
50%, you can't put solar panels on a historic building. So then it's like
Really?
you have
Well, that makes
to
sense though.
that it becomes like almost infeasible. So then you have to cover like
Also, there's more sun.
40%.
You get more sun in
Yeah,
Texas is the other thing.
that is true.
Like I think Boston has more rainy, not only more rainy days, but because it's in a higher altitude, it's going to have more dark time
Mhm.
annually.
And snow. Snow is the enemy of solar panels.
And snow. Yeah, so if you have if you cover like 2% southern Texas, like I think you'll maybe what like southwestern Texas probably has the most sun, maybe. I'm not sure. I am not sure, but it's interesting. So yeah, with all this energy, like this does become like a really big issue with the rise in data centers. And like we're going to have to keep building more data centers. I think one of the biggest interesting topics right now is people putting data centers in space. So this, this ties a lot into what we do at my company at Decent Space, but we focus a little bit more on the communications aspect here, which is I think really interesting because I think there's a lot of interesting potential for space infrastructure in the future and how we decentralize that. Even like this tie-in with energy, like there's a lot of really cool space projects that are focused on using the energy in space. So like one of them is like how do we scale like energy in space to support the data centers in space. Some people talk about how do we more efficiently power satellites in space. Sometimes you like some ideas are having another satellite that's like a partner satellite that has like more energy that it's getting from the sun, and then it laser beams that energy to say another satellite that's in orbit, and then you have like these like high energy ways, these ways of getting high energy in space and then transferring it from one spacecraft to another. And there's a few other like networks that are like focusing on things in space. So I mean, like these in space, like we're focused a lot on the communications infrastructure, but there's people like SpaceCoin. They want to do like a decentralized Starlink essentially, and um, there's some other players also like Space Computer, and they're working on like end-to-end encryption through satellites in space. I'd be curious some of your thoughts on some of these like space opportunities. Or
Yeah, I
DePIN.
mean, as a headwind, or maybe it's a tailwind, I don't know. But satellite costs are dropping dramatically, right? Like the cost to get a
Yeah.
satellite in space in the last 10 years I don't have numbers on it, but it's been driven down drastically. Almost to the point where like a very small company can launch a satellite into space with relatively low.
You can do a
Um,
ride share on SpaceX for 300K for up to 50 kilos if
wow,
you want
that's
to go on one of the
crazy.
transporter missions. Yeah.
And does that provide you with like, let's say I want to launch a server in space, like that provides me with all the comms, electricity that I would need?
No, 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 no. This would just be the launch. That's just the cost of the like launching it. If you wanted to do like server comms, like if you want to like build the satellite out, I think you're going to be spending millions most likely if you want to be doing like a server type of project in space. I did some of the math out. I think like if you want to launch like the most like if you want one Google like tensor into space and do some testing on it, like you could I think you could pull it off for under $1 million on a small CubeSat. I think this is possible. Um, but I think like if you want to be in a safe range, like you're probably spending 2 million on everything you need to launch a nice like server into space.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of
Doable.
money, right?
Yeah.
Compared to what governments have spent in the last 50 years putting satellites in space, that's almost nothing.
Yeah, it's a totally different world.
And I think to your point, like SpaceX and Starlink have really done
Mhm.
some interesting things here, and I think most critically have proved that demand exists for
Yeah.
satellite communications, right? Now that's like a direct to device satellite communications, not
Hmm.
necessarily like comms as you had put it and what
Yeah.
decent space does. But that said, I think like the general enthusiast is really excited
Hmm.
about the direction that the satellite industry is going today. And there are tons of use cases that you can apply for traditional networks or DPINs in space if you have that communications infrastructure in place.
Totally. I mean, like that's the key. The key piece is getting the infrastructure in place. That's what we're missing right now in space is like having a robust infrastructure that can support the market that should be taking place there. Like one of the big I think one of the big themes on the space side right now is like you know, industrializing space. Like people want to do manufacturing in space. People want to be like manufacturing pharmaceuticals in space, like manufacturing semiconductors in space. Like there's all these, you know, use cases that have very significant advantages in low gravity environments on a
Can you
production
double
side.
click on the pharmaceuticals? I'm not grasping what the edge is there.
Yeah, so there's a few examples here. So like one of the big companies right now is called Varda Space Industries, and so they are basically developing satellites to do like pharmaceuticals manufacturing in space, and then they ship it down to Earth after they've produced it in space. The reason that making things in space can be useful is because biological molecules they work differently in a low gravity environment. So, and even one of the really interesting things here is that it can work differently in a low gravity environment. And then once you get it back to Earth, it can still provide brand new benefits on Earth. Like there's one, oh gosh, like I should look this up real quick because I can't remember the name of it. I'm definitely not a biology expert by any means, but they've done a lot of like this research on the International Space Station. And there's one example where they produced like a drug, pharmaceutical drug in on the International Space Station, and they had to like get a really specific like crystallized form, like crystal form of the molecules. And they couldn't get it on Earth, but they got it in space. And then once they brought it back down to Earth, they could replicate that one on Earth and then use that in the targeted drug therapy. It was some type of targeted drug therapy, I think.
I
Um,
see, I see. So it's drug development, not drug production.
Both. It's actually both. So this one was like drug development related, but from what I understand, they also can do different types of manufacturing that can only be done in space.
Very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about that. I'm gonna dig in after we hop off here.
Yeah. So one of the up and coming space station, a lot of the space stations actually have this in their consideration. So there's like 4 space stations that are under development right now, and so one of them is called Starlab, and they have a huge focus on, you know, doing research in space, and one of those research areas is pharmaceuticals. So I think like what we're going to see is like we're going to see a lot of like startups as that like opportunity becomes available in space. They're going to start doing some drug development to put in space. Like they're like going to say like, oh well, there's this space station that can support all these experiments and development. Let's start sending things there.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I think that calls into question though, like how do you govern this? Like who, you produce a drug on the
Yeah,
ISS, like whose drug is that?
there are laws governing this, I think, to a certain degree. So I I'm not sure. I think if you, let's say like you're, I don't know, Columbia University, you have your medical school or research center, and they have developed a drug. It's been developed on the International Space Station. I would assume that they own it. Like they're probably going to make some of the most of the research public. But if you're a private company and you send it into space, and let's say somebody steals it from, like somehow they develop something that catches it in space and takes it with them, like are they stealing your, I think that would be stealing your technology. I don't think you're allowed to do that. I think like where you launched it from, like and who you are does matter here. But I would say I'm not an expert on this particular. There are
Makes
definitely
sense.
people who focus on space law who could answer this question.
An emerging industry. Maybe you need to be long
Yes,
space law. We'll see.
it's if I were going to be a lawyer, that would probably be the only thing that I would do. But it also creates some like really interesting stuff. Like I mean, I've been thinking a lot about like these infrafi use cases, and like I mean, how do you use what if we could finance some of this like infrastructure in space um, via like stable coins or something, and then you could generate yield on activity in space, which would be super cool. Like that's like such a cool concept. Um, Not just in space, but I think even like on Earth in general. Like it's something that I'm definitely exploring. I'd be curious what some of your thoughts on are just in general about how this would work.
Yeah, I guess to preface Infra for anyone that's not already aware, it's definitely a nascent term these days. It's basically the ability to use DeFi yield markets to finance physical infrastructure via tokenized debt products. It's like the simplest way that I could put it. Two shining examples today would be USDAI with their GPU loans and Daylight, and then their Grid product, which is the InfraFi side of the project, an energy project that will finance solar panels for the Daylight network on residential homes. It's interesting. It's something I probably should have mentioned when we were talking about tokenomics, but it's something that some people are saying, like, this is the way that you scale a DePIN. And it's, I think, the best way to bridge crypto liquidity with real world CapEx needs today without having to emit tons of tokens. DePIN projects need upfront capital and generate cash flows over time. Lenders are willing to provide capital in order for solid and like above Web 2 returns on a given market. And so you're bridging a gap and then also solving a finance gap at the same time where smaller operators actually can't access financing on the scale that they need. Usually they're at too small a scale to access traditional financing for GPUs or solar panels or whatever it is. And so these marketplaces are able to build a two-sided marketplace where yield seekers get real-world returns and infrastructure operators have fast financing without equity dilution, which I think is like a really happy marriage. Now, it doesn't necessarily apply to all products or all networks today, but in general, I'm bullish on InfraFi, and I think it's going to be, at least for capital intensive networks, like one of the best ways to get scaling off the ground in the early days.
100%.
Now, how that applies to space, I think is very much still TBD.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, I think on the regulatory side of this, it's going to be a big headache to figure out, and I think there's a lot that has to be done to make it work correctly. Because I mean, the way that I see this being is kind of like a credit union, essentially. Like it's going to work like a decentralized bank at the end of the day, where you have if you're interfacing with these assets, like it's going to be heavily regulated, and you're going to have some. Basically, there has to be players in the middle that are going to make it easy, but they'll take on all the regulatory risk and burden to make it work. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I guess is this like the long-term vision for the industry? I think like actually this is probably like a really good last topic to hit is like where is DePIN going? Like is this InfraFi? Is this going to be like a really core piece of the future for DePIN? What do you think we're going to see in the next like 3, 4, 5 years?
I'm still TBD out. Like the jury's still out on if this is the future, but it's clear and it's well regarded that DePINs need a better way to fund upfront bootstrapping. At the same time, in DeFi today, lending protocols are extremely popular. People are always looking for outsized yield opportunities, and these yield opportunities are not correlated to DeFi revenues, DeFi activity, anything like that.
Yeah.
And so maybe you could get a higher APY by doing some sort of complex strategy on chain with just like USDC and looping. But you're generally going to be getting a pretty solid APY on something like this as a lender. And I think there's significant demand for that, not only from crypto native participants, but from institutions who are seeking yield and especially seeking non-correlated yield.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key.
In terms of a long-term vision, I think the idea here and what everyone's hoping for is that DePIN can begin to unbundle infrastructure monopolies, right? In the US, there are very few, but there's a couple of infrastructure monopolies that are out there today. But across the world, I mean, there are. It's at a national level, like most utilities are nationalized and run in a monopolistic way.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking that DePIN will replace those, but I'm certain that DePIN will be a component of beginning to A, share the resources, and B, spread out the economic impact that a given industry can have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really solid point because I see it as a force multiplier for sure. Like it's able to really address some of the gaps and the infrastructure provision that I think a lot of the centralized entities just will never be able to match.
I guess to top off on that, you have sort of like 3 layers within distributed networks. You've got your bare metal layer, that's just the hardware. You've got your orchestration layer, and then you've got your aggregation layer on top of that, right? And I'm seeing companies moving closer and closer to that orchestration layer / like service level layer. And I think that winners from here on out will be the ones that are not necessarily aggregating supply from other protocols yet, but are building a base layer and then offering services on top of that to either make it more composable, to make it integrate with other things, and just generally offer a better, cheaper, faster, and more capital efficient user experience to the people that demand access to your product.
And I mean, that's the goal. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what you want to be doing. You want to be delivering the most valuable service to those customers.
Yeah, I mean, there are real benefits to decentralizing networks. Like outside of crypto, take the crypto out of the equation, there are physical constraints that you cannot meet without a DePIN network. A prime example of that today is 00 aggregating private fiber to speed up validator infrastructure, but apply that to other industries, right? Like validator infrastructure is a very small industry, but apply private fiber to a global network, and like there are a million different ways that you could scale that business.
And I think the cool thing there is that really ties into this like really core like invisible user experience where, like, you know, today, like, I mean, people, they can be using Helium mobile and they don't have to think that they're connected to a decentralized network. They just want to use their phone. That's it. At the end of the day, they just want to get like go look at TikTok or Reels or whatever, and like they're not even thinking that they're interacting with this network. And so, yeah, I think that's like the real power of DePIN is the way that it bridges these two sides of, you know, a decentralized networking layer to a real world experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super bullish on that side of things. And Helium Mobile is a prime example, but like there are going to be other projects that are able to do the same thing, and like not the same thing as Helium, but build that bare metal layer and then offer just a multitude of services on top of that, or even just middleware to make it accessible to a point where the majority of users have no idea they're using crypto, but know that the product they're using is vastly better than wherever they came from. And I think that's sort of the phase that we're entering into today.
And that's the really exciting phase, because that's, I mean, to tie it all back into what we had at the beginning, for better or for worse, if we want to use the word DePIN or not, I mean, that's the whole idea of building these types of, I would say, distributed IoT networks that have an incentive.
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't be more optimistic on the industry on sort of like probably a 10-year time horizon here. But I think it's going to take some time. It's going to take definitely some regulation, and it's going to take maturation in crypto more broadly before we see this thing really start to rip.
I completely agree. But it's I mean, it's a super exciting time, I think, for DePIN and to be part of this movement. Well, thank you so much, Nick. Well, I think it'll be a good time to like wrap up here. Really appreciate having you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super honored to be here. Thanks to Super Team Germany. Big fan of Super Team globally. And super excited about the pod, super excited about DePIN space, and looking forward to chatting with you soon.
Hell yeah. I'll talk to you soon. Yes. Thanks. You already said thank you to Super Team Germany for me, but I also have to double thank you to Super Team Germany. Well, we're going to be working on another DePIN dinner here in Germany sometime soon. So have to have you come out for one of those maybe.
Awesome. Yeah, would love to join.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. And to everybody listening, have a good one. Bye-bye.